My sister framed me, cried to my parents, and got me thrown out, barefoot at 15. Weeks later, she bragged about it, and Mom overheard everything. Kyle, an 18-year-old guy, was 15 when all of this occurred, and if you asked my family to characterize me back then, they would most likely mention the problem. My father was among those who believed that respect was a one-way path. You either give it to him without question, or you receive the belt of his voice and, on sometimes, his actual belt. My mother followed his lead as if it were gospel. Then there was Becca, my sister, who was 2 years younger and yet the perfect child. She could set the kitchen on fire while making popcorn, and my dad would call it a learning experience. I forgot to mow the grass once, and I'm irresponsible and heading nowhere in life. That is how it has always been. Everything she did was forgiven. Every action I took demonstrated that I was doomed to make mistakes. If she passed an exam, it was because she was diligent and intelligent. If I passed a test, it was due of luck. She was the golden child, and I was the one that brought the family down. I'd always thought it was unjust, but I never imagined she'd take it to that level that night. It started normally. I was in my room with my ancient laptop, fiddling with some music downloads and half-assing homework. It was late, possibly past 11. My door swung open so hard that it struck the wall, and both my parents stormed in as if I had set off an alarm. My mother's face was flushed, and my father's veins were visible on his forehead. Behind them, Becca pretended to cry so hard that she should have received a medal. "He stole it. I saw him take it from Dad's wallet," she wailed, pointing directly at me. "What?" I sat up straight, perplexed as heck. Dad is already storming across the room, looking around like he's on an investigation show. Then he grabbed my pillow, lifted it, and there it was. Crumpled bills, possibly worth $300 to $400, were pushed behind it. I swear my stomach sank through the floor. "I told you!" Becca exclaimed, crocodile tears streaming down her cheeks. My head couldn't even process. I had not touched his wallet. I hadn't even gone near it. But before I could say anything, Dad was in my face, jabbing his finger at my chest. "You embarrassed this family for the last damn time. You think we didn't notice things missing before? You think we're stupid?" I jumped up abruptly, shaking my head. "That isn't mine. She planted it. She's lying. Why would I take money when I've been saving every penny I could from babysitting and mowing lawns? Ask Mrs. Novak next door. Enough!" He barked so loudly that it rattled my glass. "A liar and a thief! You've made this house a joke!" I turned at my mother for support, but she didn't even look me in the eye. She repeated what Dad said. There were no questions, as if it were the law. Meanwhile, Becca stood behind them, head lowered like a saint. But I noticed the sneer, that little flicker of joy on her lips as Dad began tearing up my room, tossing my belongings into a trash bag as if I were some stray they were discarding. "Dad, please." "It isn't true," I exclaimed, my voice breaking. But it didn't matter. He snatched my rucksack from the corner, dumped it onto the bed, and began filling it with odd clothes. Mom began to say something, but a frown from Dad silenced her. Becca let out a big sniffle. "I'm terrified to even share a house with him because he gets so angry. What if he hurts me?" That cut worse than anything. I spun toward her, my heart hammering. "What are you talking about? I've never laid a hand on you." But the harm had already been done. Dad clenched his jaw. "That's it. Out now." They thrust the bags into my arms and dragged me down the hallway, with Becca trailing behind, whispering, "I told you they'd believe me." When we reached the front door, Dad jerked it open. The night air struck me like ice. I was barefoot and still wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. Dad shoved me onto the porch so forcefully that I stumbled. My sneakers were still at the door, so I grabbed them before he could close it completely. "You don't come back here until you're ready to admit what you did and apologize to your sister," he said quietly and definitively. "I didn't do anything," I exclaimed, my throat raw. "She's lying to you. She set me up." "Don't you dare talk about her like that," my dad said. "She's been nothing but good to this family. You're jealous, Kyle. Jealous and bitter." The door slammed shut, shaking the glass panes. For a few moments, I stood there, garbage bag dropping from my arms, waiting for it to swing open again, to discover they just kicked out their own child over some tears and planted cash. It never did. I sat down on the porch steps, shivering, and looked out at the peaceful street. I wasn't only grounded, I wasn't only in trouble. I was out, Exiled. I'm 15 years old and standing outside my own house with nothing but a trash bag of clothes and a backpack. I knew my sister had won. She had their trust, affection, and unwavering commitment, and I was disposable. I recall gripping the trash bag as if it were a lifeline, my chest so tight I could hardly breathe. Part of me wanted to rush back inside and pound on the door until they listened. Another portion realized it wouldn't matter. They had made their choice. And as I eventually stepped off that porch and began heading into the night, one idea burned brighter than the rest. They'd choose to trust her lies than my truth. That's when I understood I wasn't the only black sheep. I had already been cut out of the herd. The first night, I went around the block till my legs hurt. I wasn't even sure where I was headed. It was late and freezing, and I was clutching a garbage bag like a runaway. I considered crashing at the park, but the benches were soaked from sprinklers. Then it struck me. Lindsay lived a few blocks over. She'd been my best friend since middle school, so I believed maybe her folks would let me spend the night. Her eyes widened as she noticed me standing there in sweatpants, carrying a garbage bag. She let me in quickly, whispered inquiries, and I informed her that they had kicked me out. She didn't seem astonished, just sad. She gave me a blanket on the floor and some leftover pizza, and I slept more soundly than I had in weeks. Her mother was not as forgiving. The next morning, she approached me privately. She wasn't nasty, just straightforward with me. "Kyle, you can stay for a few nights, but I can't afford another mouth. You'll have to figure something out." I nodded, pretending everything was okay, but my stomach wrenched. Lindsay's mother drove me to school early on the third night and told me I couldn't return. That was it. I placed my garbage bag inside my locker and pretended I had somewhere else to go. From then on, I began couch surfing. A classmate let me crash on their sofa for the night. Another let me remain in their basement, but only for tonight. People did not want to cope with the drama in my family. After approximately a week, I was out of alternatives. That was when I began sleeping wherever I could. Behind the gas station, in a nook near the dumpsters, where the light did not shine. I used to be able to hide until closing time at the library, but the security guy found me after a couple of nights and kicked me out. I tried the school bathroom once, shutting myself in a stall, but someone came in, noticed my bag, and word traveled quickly. Hunger was terrible than cold. I had maybe $40 saved from cutting lawns and babysitting. That money was quickly spent on cheap hamburgers and vending machine munchies. Following that, I either missed meals or drank from water fountains. My stomach grumbled loudly in class. I would receive looks. School didn't make things simpler. Becca worked quickly. At the end of the first week, everyone had heard the story. How I stole money from my father, how I was booted out. She made it sound like I was a junkie in training. When I sat down next to them, the kids brought their backpacks closer. Teachers gave me long stares that indicated they'd already been warned about me. As I sat down in arithmetic class, a female moved her notepad. "Sorry, I don't want my stuff stolen," she whispered under her breath, just loud enough for everyone to hear. The entire row snickered. I wanted to yell, but I knew it wouldn't help. One day in the hallway, Evan, a basketball player, shoulder-checked me and yelled, "Watch your hands, thief!" I shoved him back out of reflex, and for a brief moment, I believed we were about to swing. A teacher broke it up, but I received the warning, not him. "One more incident, Kyle, and you're suspended." I heard this everywhere I went. Becca shines, I sink. She made it loud enough so that everyone knew she was responsible with money, unlike some others. I believe she'd catch my glance across the cafeteria, give me a slight smirk, and then resume her lovely demeanor in front of her buddies. She relished every second of it. By the second week, I was a ghost at my own school. Nobody wanted me around. I sat alone, ate alone when I had food, and pretended I didn't care. But internally, it was eating me alive. Nights were the worst. I'd curl up with my backpack and sweatshirt over my face, hoping cops wouldn't bother me or a drunk wouldn't walk by. The chilly concrete caused my back to ache. My shoes were stinky from walking miles every day merely to waste time. And all I could think about was, my own family did this to me. Not strangers, not enemies, my sister. One night, I attempted to sneak into the library again. I figured if I concealed better, maybe they wouldn't notice. I curled myself behind a row of shelves and used my bag as a pillow. Around midnight, the guard's flashlight struck me directly in the eyes. He shakes his head. "You can't stay here, kid." He ushered me out the side door as if I were a trespasser. I wasn't sure where to go. And for the first time, the concept struck me. Perhaps this is precisely what they wanted. Perhaps they didn't want me alive anymore. I ended myself curled up behind the petrol station, among the garbage. I closed my eyes, but all I saw was Becca's smug little face, pretending to cry as my parents shoved me out the door. She had won, at least for now. I kept telling myself that someone, anyone, would eventually listen. Perhaps the adults at school weren't completely blind. Perhaps one of my family would truly have a backbone. I was mistaken. It all started with my father finding me. I'm not sure how he knew where I was. Perhaps Becca told him. Perhaps he just drove around till he saw me. I was seated on a park bench with my hoodie drawn tight when his car's headlight struck me. He came up so fast I feared he was going to run me over. "Get in the car," he demanded, slamming the door behind him. I stayed firmly rooted on the bench. I felt my gut tighten just hearing his voice. "Now," he demanded. I shake my head. "Not unless you're ready to admit Becca lied." His face contorted like if I'd spit in it. "Don't you dare talk about your sister like that. She's been through enough because of you." "Through enough," was my reply. "She planted the money. She framed me, and you just believed her." His jaw tightened. He took a step closer, pointing his finger at me as if it were a weapon. "You're going to come home. You're going to admit what you did, and you're going to apologize. Or I'll call the police and tell them you've been stealing from stores, begging for money on the street. Do you understand me?" I clenched my purse's latch. I am not coming home to be treated like garbage again. You can call anybody you want, but I'm not going to admit to something I didn't do. For a brief moment, I believed he was going to swing at me, his fists curled and his face hot. But then he swung around, went back to the car, and took off, leaving me shaking. That was the moment it hit home. He did not want the truth. He only wanted control. The next day at school, I approached the counselor. I thought, hey, maybe they'll believe me if I just lay it all out. I sat in that office, my heart racing. I told her everything. How Becca placed the money, how she brags about it, and how my parents kicked me out. She listened, nodding with that blank expression counselors have. When I finished, she sighed. "Kyle, I understand you're under a lot of stress, but accusing your sister without evidence isn't going to help. Your parents already spoke to us. They're concerned about your behavior. They claimed you were unstable." Unstable? That word affected me the most, as if I were a ticking bomb rather than a youngster camping outside gas stations. "I'm telling the truth," I explained, my voice quivering. She simply shook her head. "Focus on your schoolwork. The best way to show your family you're trustworthy is through your actions." So, basically, suck it up. That's what she intended. I attempted one more angle. I contacted my aunt from a payphone outside the supermarket. She picked up cheerfully until she heard me speak. Her tone changed as soon as I told what had transpired. "Kyle, this isn't something I can get involved in. Your parents are doing what they think is best. Maybe if you just said sorry." I hung up before she could finish. My own blood did not want to touch this trash. Everyone wanted the easy version of the story. Kyle is incompetent. Becca is perfect. Case closed. That night, I sat outside the petrol station, back against the wall, sipping water I'd filled in the bathroom sink, hoping to feel something in my gut. A neon sign buzzed overhead. Cars drove in and out, and I sat there, unseen. Then I heard the voice that I despised the most. "Wow, didn't think you'd last this long out here." I looked up, and there she was. Becca was holding a Pepsi, casual as heck, as if she were simply passing by to say hello. I glared. "Why are you here?" she asked, smirking. "Curious, I guess." "I wanted to see how long it would be before you crawled back." My fists clenched. "Why are you doing this to me? You think you had it rough? Try being me. Mom and Dad never let me slip. Not once. Every grade, every chore, every little thing I did was compared to you. If I messed up, it was, 'Don't be like your brother.' That's all I ever heard." I frowned, but she continued, her voice low and steady. "Now, for once, I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to prove anything. All I have to do is not screw up like you. And honestly, that's easy. I'm not giving that up." "You're sick," I mumbled. Her grin broadened. "What's really sick is how easy it was." Everyone already thought you were the screw-up. I just gave them proof. I wanted to shout, shove her or something, but she leaned in, her voice lowering. And if you keep pushing it, if you keep running your mouth about me, I'll make up something even worse. And then you won't just be homeless, you'll be locked up. She stated it calmly and confidently, which made my skin crawl. She wasn't lying. She was already planning her next move. She strolled away as if she hadn't just threatened to destroy what little I had left. And as I sat there in the warmth of that gas station sign, it dawned on me. She was not simply attempting to make me appear terrible. She wanted to utterly erase me. That thought lingered in my mind for days. Every time I tried to sleep behind the gas station or strolled around to waste daylight, it played back in my mind like an echo. Becca wasn't simply glad I was gone. She wanted to eliminate me like if I never existed. By the third week, I had sunk lower than I had imagined imaginable. My cash was gone, my phone died, and I hadn't had a real meal in 2 days. I lugged the garbage bag everywhere, school, bus stops, and parking lots. It wasn't even closed anymore. It was like a sign around my neck, homeless loser. One night, I attempted to hide again in the school library. I reasoned that if I hid deeper behind the shelves, I might be able to avoid detection. Around midnight, a flashlight beam struck me directly in the face. Security grabbed my arm and marched me outside. I already told you, you can't sleep here, kid. Try this one more time and I'll report you. Then you'll be suspended, he stated with a smirk. It began to rain shortly after. I walked for miles, rain pouring through my hoodie, my shoes squishing with each step. My trash bag became so wet that the plastic tore and half of my garments spilled on the sidewalk. I grabbed them up anyhow, clutching the sack tightly. Even though everything smelled of mildew, I ended up under the awning of a closed laundry. My stomach clenched with hunger, the type that made you lightheaded. That was my breaking point. I sat there shivering, thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe I'll just disappear out here and nobody will notice. That's when Lindsay arrived. She came rushing up with an umbrella, hair stuck to her forehead, out of breath as if she had been seeking. Kyle, why didn't you answer your phone? I've been looking for you everywhere. My phone's dead, I murmured. The truth was, I hadn't had a charger in weeks. She crouched next to me, disregarding the puddles that soaked her jeans. You look awful. Thanks, I replied, attempting to laugh, but my voice cracked. She placed a crumpled envelope into my hands. Here, take it. I frowned. What is it? Just open it. Inside was about $60, largely in little banknotes. My throat clenched. Lindsay, I can't. You can. She cut me off. It's my allowance. I don't need it. You do. I could not even speak. I simply nodded, hugging it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She looked around and lowered her voice. There's something else. Becca bragged at a party. I heard her. She told people she planted the money, that she set you up. My head snapped toward her. She admitted it. Yeah, but nobody believed her. They thought she was showing off. Some even said, even if it was true, you probably deserved it. It was like being kicked in the chest. Deserved it. That's what people thought of me. I rose up and paced under the awning. If I can get someone to back me up, they won't, Lindsay remarked quietly. She's too popular. Nobody wants to cross her. They all think you're already a lost cause. The quiet between us said everything. It wasn't only my parents. Everyone had written me off. That night, I sat in the laundry doorway, dripping wet, my clothes stinking, and my stomach churning. As I glanced at the street, something within me hardened. If no one was going to stand up for me, I would have to do it myself. That evening, after cleaning up in a gas station bathroom, I took my damp garbage bag and began walking. I was not nervous. I was not scared. I was just finished. When I turned down our street, my chest clenched. The house looked the same as before. White siding, flower pots on the porch, the place I grew up in. But it wasn't mine anymore. I waited there for a long time, rain dripping down my hood, before heading up the driveway. I was going to walk through that door and make them hear me. Whether they liked it or not, my fist struck the door 3 times, loud enough to sting my knuckles. For a little moment, nothing happened. Then footsteps. The door creaked open, and there was Becca, as if she had been waiting. Her brows rose and twisted into a sneer. Well, look who crawled back, she explained. I shoved past her before she could stop me. My wet shoes creaked across the hardwood. I'm not here to stay. I'm here to talk. My mother's voice echoed through the main room. Kyle! A second later, she appeared, drying her hands with a dish towel. Dad followed, arms folded, and his face already red. Out now. No, I replied, chest heaving. You're going to hear me this time. You've believed her lies long enough. Tonight, you're going to hear mine. Dad took a step forward, looming above me. Watch your tone. You don't get to barge into this house. And watch my tone, I said, louder than I intended. You threw me out with a trash bag because Becca cried and waved a couple bills around. You didn't even ask for my side, not once. Because we know you, Dad replied sharply. You've always been reckless, Kyle, always jealous. Dad's face stiffened, but I continued on, fire building in my chest. Jealous? Let's talk about that. Remember when she copied my science project? Teacher called home, and you punished me for making her cheat. She cried, and you believed her. Always the same story. She's the angel. I'm the screw-up. Doesn't matter what actually happened. Dad clenched his jaw. For a fleeting second, I seen something spark in his eyes. He knew I was correct. He knew it. But rather than admitting it, he doubled down. He took a step closer, the smell of aftershave and wrath reaching me. Don't you stand here and disgrace your family. You've done nothing but pull this house down since you were a teenager. You want me to acknowledge we favored her? Fine, we did, but she earned it. She keeps her grades up, helps your mother, and stays out of trouble. You can't even keep a roof over your head. The words landed harder than a fist. My fists curled, but I forced myself to remain upright. I can't keep a roof because you threw me out, because she framed me, and you believed her without a second thought. Behind him, Becca leaned against the wall, sipping from a glass of water as if watching TV, a sneer on her face. I turned toward her. Go on, swear right now you didn't plant that money. Look me in the eye and swear it. She tilted her head, lips twitching as if she was about to laugh. Sure, I swear, she responded, her voice full of sarcasm. I pointed at her, my voice breaking. You hear that? You can't even take her seriously. She's lying to your faces, and you're still falling for it. Dad's face turned hot, and his hands curled again. Then, out of nowhere, he grabbed a glass from the table and threw it at me. His aim was off, but it blasted on the wall directly close to my head. Shards came down, cutting my arm and cheek. Blood dripped down, but he only pointed at the door, his voice low and quivering with wrath. Get out before I call the cops and tell them you broke in. You want to keep making scenes? Fine, you can do it from a jail cell. I steadied myself, my breath ragged, my chest thumping, my throat burning, but I refused to cry. You've made your choice, I remarked quietly. You picked her. You always pick her. One day, you're going to see her for what she is. And when that happens, don't come looking for me. The room fell silent, except for Becca's gentle chuckle. Wow, she said under her breath, shaking her head. Drama much? I retrieved my luggage from the floor and turned toward the door. Every step felt heavy, as if I were dragging chains, but I did not stop. At the threshold, I swung around one more, staring at everyone, my parents transfixed, Becca smirking. You think I'm the problem? Fine, but when the truth blows up in your faces, remember this moment. Remember I warned you. Then I wrenched the door open, went into the darkness, and slammed it behind me. The cool air hit me in the face, combining with the sting of the shallow wounds down my arm. I walked quickly, mouth hard, as if putting enough distance between myself and the home would allow me to breathe again. I got halfway down the block before I heard footsteps, quick and irregular, as if someone were jogging to catch up. Wait up, bro! I spun around, heart pounding. And there she was, Becca, jogging behind me, calm as usual, her face shining in the dark light of the street lamp. She was smiling as if this were a game for her, as if Dad hadn't just tried to shatter me with a glass seconds before. As Becca stepped onto the porch, I thought I heard the screen door squeak behind her, but I was too preoccupied with her smug smirk to notice. My stomach flipped. What do you want now? I demanded, my tone sharper than intended. She slowed to a walk, slipping her hands into her hoodie pocket with a relaxed posture as if she were going for a late stroll. Relax. I just wanted to see how far you'd actually take this. I glared at her, my fists tightening tight as my arms ached from the cuts. Farther than you think. I'm done letting you run the show. Her grin grew, her teeth catching in the streetlight's radiance. You still don't get it, do you? Nobody's ever going to believe you. You can scream, cry, bleed all over the sidewalk. It won't matter. To them, you'll always be the screw-up, and I'll always be the one they're proud of. Proud? I sneered, shaking my head. You destroyed me. Destroyed you? She repeated, twisting her head as if I had uttered something amusing. Then her voice lowered, crueler. I didn't destroy you. I just gave them proof of what they already believed. That was the smartest thing I've ever done. My stomach turned. My chest tightened. Say it again, I said, moving closer. She leaned in, her voice a whisper, as if she wanted to enjoy every word. I framed you. I planted the money. And I'd do it again. Watching you beg while I win. That's the best part. The words sliced through me like a razor. I could almost hear the blood gushing through my ears and feel every drop dripping down my arm from where the glass shards had ripped into me. Then another voice pierced the silence. Excuse me. We froze like statues. Mom stood on the edge of the porch step. Her face was pale, and her arms were crossed tightly across her chest. She must have followed Becca out without us noticing. For once, her eyes were not filled with rage toward me. They were focused on Becca. What did you just say? Mom said, her tone stern, as if she didn't recognize the daughter in front of them. Becca stiffened, the smirk slipping straight off her face. Mom, it was nothing. He's twisting it. Don't lie to me, Mom said, walking down onto the sidewalk. Her voice shook, but her expression was dead serious. I heard you. You admitted it. You said you planted the money. For the first time in weeks, I felt something crack open inside me, a glimmer of hope. My chest clenched, and words tumbled out before I could control them. You heard her, Mom. You finally heard her. Becca's mouth opened and then closed again. There are no excuses, phony tears, or quick spins on the story. She was rattled. The screen door smashed against the frame, and Dad stormed onto the porch, his words echoing around the yard. What's going on? Mom turned to face him, her hands shaking. She admitted it, Martin. She just admitted she framed Kyle. Dad blinked, his face losing color. His pace slowed as he approached the bottom of the porch, as if he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the response. He looked at Becca, his jaw set. Is that true? Becca's lip twitched. She looked between me, Mom, and Dad, panic flashing through her eyes. Her fingers fidgeted within her hoodie pocket, clawing at the fabric. She opened her mouth as if to deny it again, but her expression twisted, and the words came out like venom. So, what if I did? I had to. You two always leaned on me to be the perfect one, the example. I couldn't risk him screwing that up, so I took care of it. I made sure he was the one you gave up on. Her voice cracked with the final words, but the harm had already been done. The hush that followed made the air feel dense. Mom staggered back, her hand reaching for her mouth. Oh my God! Tears streamed down her cheeks, and her body shook as if she had just been sucker punched. Dad's jaw tightened, and his hands curled again, this time at her rather than me. His face was flushed, his eyes steely, as if he were looking at a stranger in his own home. You ruined your brother's life, Mom murmured, her voice hoarse. You threw me out, I exclaimed, my throat hurting. You believed her over me. You tossed me in the street with nothing because she cried and pointed her finger. And now you hear the truth, and it's too late. Becca crossed her arms, attempting to hide the cracks in her voice with a false assurance. Don't act like you're some victim. You were always the mistake. I just made sure everyone else finally saw it. Her words hit me like another piece of glass shattered against my skin. I clenched my fist tighter, not to hit her, but to keep myself from collapsing. The silence extended. Mom sobbed openly. Dad simply gazed, gutted, as if the ground had been pulled out from beneath him. And I stood there in the street, bleeding and exhausted, but ultimately vindicated. Now they knew the truth, but it didn't erase the fact that they'd picked her over me when it counted the most. It was too late to repair the harm. The yard fell silent following Becca's confession. Mom froze, tears streaming down her cheeks. Dad seems to have lost his composure. Becca attempted to cross her arms and appear tough, but her hands shook. For once, her little act did not work. I walked forward, drying blood streaking on my arm from the glass pieces that had cut me. My voice was rough and steady. You don't just get to stand here and act shocked. You ruined me. You tossed me out with nothing. Let the whole neighborhood think I was a thief because it was easier to believe her fake tears than your own son. You don't fix that with a couple words. You're going to fix it the right way. Dad snapped his head toward me as if he couldn't believe I was still speaking. Watch your tone. No, I replied firmly. You don't get to tell me how to talk anymore. You lost that when you threw me out. If you want me to even think about stepping back in that house, you're going to clear my name publicly. Mom blinked back tears. Publicly? I nodded. You're going to write a post on Facebook, on the church page, in the family group chat. I don't care where. You're going to tell everyone the truth, that I never stole, that you spoiled Becca and let her lies destroy me. You're going to admit it for everyone to see. Otherwise, I'll do it myself. And trust me, I'll include everything, including how Dad threw a glass at me tonight. Dad's cheeks turned red. We don't air family business online. I laughed bitterly. You already did when you threw me in the street with a trash bag. You let Becca's story run wild at school, at church, with neighbors. You were fine letting everyone whisper about me. Now you're going to be fine undoing it. Mom's weeping intensified. She turned to Dad, her voice breaking. Martin, he's right. We did this. We let it happen. She waited for him to respond as she always did, but he remained stiff, fists tight, and no words came out. For the first time, his silence did not protect her. It dragged her down with him. Mom had always been obedient to Dad's instructions. She repeated every penalty, rule, and phrase he had spoken. But tonight, his silence wasn't sufficient. He was losing control, and she recognized it. Her hands shook as she took out her phone. If you won't say it, Martin, she muttered, then I will. Dad's look pierced through her, as if she had betrayed him. But she did not stop. Her fingers trembled as they lingered over the screen. Tell me what to write, she asked me. Becca's head jerked towards her. What? Mom, you can't. Quiet, Mom snapped, her voice shrill. You did this. You brought us here. I walked closer, heart racing, and dictated slowly. We need to apologize publicly. Our son Kyle was wrongly accused of stealing. The truth is, our daughter Becca framed him and we believed her. We spoiled her, protected her, and let her lies destroy his reputation. We failed as parents, and Kyle deserves to be seen for who he really is, not the scapegoat we made him. Mom typed every letter with her hands trembling. Dad stood straight, his face hard as stone. But he did not stop her. She hit the post. The words were out there. The damage could not be undone. Within minutes, her phone was buzzing with notifications. Comments poured in from relatives, church members, and even neighbors we did not know. I'm really sorry, Kyle. It takes guts to admit this. Dad's face became pale as more and more piled up. He was aware that his iron control had been lost. Becca snapped. You just ruined my life, she exclaimed. Everyone's going to hate me now. Dad rounded on her, his voice low and threatening. No, Becca, you ruined your own life. Her face collapsed for the first time. There was no grin or phony tears, only panic. I stood there, bleeding and drained, yet lighter than I had felt in months. You wanted me gone, Becca. You wanted me erased. Now it's your mask that's erased. Everyone knows who you are. She stared at me, yet her voice was shaky. You think they'll ever forgive you? You'll always be the one who caused drama. I came closer, my gaze fixed on hers. No, I'll be the one who survived it. You'll be the liar who got caught. The silence was profound, broken only by Mom's muted tears and the continual pinging of her phone. Dad appeared 10 years older in that moment. And Becca, she finally appeared small. I put my backpack over my shoulder and walked toward the porch. I'm taking back my bed. You're not doing me a favor. You owe me. You threw me out. Now you're going to feed me, give me a roof, and live with what you did. Nobody argued. Mom and Dad just stood there, hollow. They did not attempt to block me this time, not after the confession, not after the post got public, and not after their precious control fell away. For once, no one dared to oppose me. Inside, the house felt strange, like if I was entering someone else's home. But I was not a guest. Not anymore. I'd brought the truth to light. I had recovered what they had stolen. As I dropped my garbage bag down beside the stairs, I noticed them all waiting there. Mom's eyes were hollow, Dad's expression stern, and Becca was furious. You wanted a perfect daughter so badly you turned me into the villain, I murmured, my voice low but steady. Tonight, you told the world the truth. Don't think that fixes it. But at least now everyone knows what kind of family you really are. And so I marched upward, each step heavy yet steady. For the first time in weeks, I was going to sleep in a proper bed. Not because they allowed it, but because I demanded it. They had cast me away once. I was the one who chose to stay. My sister hijacked my graduation party mic, humiliated me with lies, then months later was dragged from court in handcuffs, screaming my name. My sister Claudia has been mean to me for as long as I can remember. When we were kids, she cut the head off my favorite stuffed bunny while staring me straight in the eye and remarked, "Well, now it's realistic. Bunnies die." If I ever got new clothes, she would borrow them without asking, return them dirty or stretched out, and laugh at my tears. My mother gave me a necklace for my 10th birthday that I had been wanting for months. The very next day, Claudia flushed it down the toilet during an argument and then gaslit me with, "You probably lost it. You're always careless. School was even worse." She would create stories about me, tell embarrassing lies to my crushes, and insult me in front of her friends. If I received decent grades, she'd accuse me of attempting to make her look stupid. If I struggled with something, Mom would tell everyone that I was slow. My parents consistently dismissed it as sibling rivalry. The standard, "You two need to get along. One day, you'll only have each other's speech." But I quickly discovered that my sister did not want to get along. She wanted me to feel embarrassed and humiliated. By the time high school came along, I had mastered the art of staying out of her way, but she kept digging at me. When I joined the debate team and began winning competitions, she insulted me as a desperate nerd attempting to appear important. When I was accepted to my ideal institution, she sneered, "Don't get too excited. You'll probably fail and come back." I was really looking forward to my high school graduation celebration. It wasn't only about the party. It was about finally appreciating something I'd worked for without Claudia in the spotlight. My parents agreed to let me host it in our backyard. I invited friends, instructors, and extended relatives. I spent weeks planning it, with fairy lights, a taco bar, and a music that I spent hours creating. Of course, Claudia was upset about it. She began with passive-aggressive statements. Why did she have a lavish party? I didn't receive one. She did, although she did not enjoy parties back then. It's only high school. Nobody cares. I'm going to be extremely bored that day. I told her straight up, "If you can't be nice, just stay out of the way." She smirked and added, "Don't worry, I'll make it memorable." That should have been my warning. Everything began out well on the celebration day. Then Claudia made her move. First, she turned up the music to ear-splitting levels and began playing songs she knew I detested. When I ordered her to stop, she said loudly to my guests, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize the party dictator was here." Then when everyone was eating, she inadvertently spilled Coke all over the dessert table, ruining the cake, cupcakes, and fruit display I had worked so hard on. She fake apologized in the most sarcastic tone possible. "Oops, my bad. Guess we'll have to diet today." But the worst thing happened afterward. Claudia took the microphone for the speech I had not asked her to give while I was conversing with my old English teacher. She began recounting humiliating things about me, some exaggerated, others just made up. Examples include, one time she peed her pants in middle school. She once cried for an hour because I ate her cookie. Don't worry, she's going to be a great college student if she can survive without Mom packing her lunch. Everyone laughed awkwardly, but I could feel my cheeks burning. I tried to take the microphone, but she yanked it away. That was when I snapped. I told her to go. She rolled her eyes and said, "Relax, it's just a joke. God, you're so sensitive." She walked away, but the harm had been done. The mood of the celebration was ruined. People kept attempting to console me, but all I could think was, she did it again. She couldn't let me have this one day. After that, I stopped speaking with her totally. I didn't respond to her texts, calls, or snarky apology, which simply said, "Sorry if you took it the wrong way." For the following 6 months, she tried to behave as if nothing happened. At family dinners, she'd sit next to me and ask about school as if we were closest friends. If I ignored her, she'd say, "Wow, still holding a grudge? You need to get over it." Then, over Thanksgiving, she made one last dig. "You're acting like I ruined your wedding or something. It was just a high school party." I gave her a straight face and responded, "It was my celebration. You ruined it on purpose. You've been tearing me down my whole life, and I'm done giving you access to me, and I intended it." I stopped inviting her to my events. I exited family group chats and informed my parents, "If she's there, I'm not." Naturally, the guilt tripping began right away. My mother called last week and said Claudia was ready to talk. She put her on speaker mode without telling me, and Claudia's first words were, "So, are you done being dramatic?" I hung up right away and tossed my phone across the room, where it bounced off my dorm wall. My hands shook as I took it back up and blocked Claudia's number for the 15th time this week. 20 minutes later, my roommate knocked on my door, holding her laptop and wearing a strange expression. She showed me her Instagram messages, and there were 3 new profiles, all made within the last hour, sending her walls of text about how I was mentally ill and needed assistance. The usernames were made up of random integers, but the writing style was entirely Claudia. My roommate watched as I took screenshots of everything and saved them in the evidence folder I'd created on my laptop. The next morning in the cafeteria, she sat across from me and moved her plate away. She inquired if any of Claudia's claims were real, and I could tell she wasn't sure what to trust. I took out my phone and showed her the video Elisa had taken at my graduation party, which included Claudia's entire speech and my attempt to grab the microphone. Her expression changed from bewildered to scared as she watched. She stated my sister was very messed up and asked whether I had told anyone about it. That afternoon, I walked to the college counseling center and stood outside for 10 minutes before finally entering. The receptionist handed me an intake form, and I sat there staring at the section on family connections. There was a checkbox for familial trauma, and I hovered my pen over it for a minute before marking it. 3 days later, I was sitting in Dr. Sar Moreau's office telling her about the plush bunny and how Claudia had looked me in the eyes while ripping off its head. I told her about the jewelry in the toilet, the graduation party, and everything else. She listened without interrupting, then said something that made my entire body feel lighter. She stated that what I had experienced was not sibling rivalry, but rather systematic emotional abuse. That night, Albert discovered me crying in the common room after my father left me a voicemail about how I was pulling the family apart. He sat down next to me, and I eventually told him everything from the beginning. He held me as I described 20 years of being ripped down and humiliated. He said, "No wonder you flinch when people raise their voices." Later that week, I was alone in my room going through old family photos on my laptop. Claudia was either smirking at the camera or doing something to injure me that appeared to be playful but was actually not. She was tugging my hair, grabbing my arm, or treading on my foot as everyone else smiled for the picture. How come no one noticed what was going on right in front of them? A week later, I was studying when someone began hammering on my door. I opened it to find my mother standing there, with Claudia directly behind her. My mother said we'd speak it out like grown-ups and began pushing past me toward my room. I blocked the doorway and told them to go, but Claudia screamed that I was overly emotional and selfish. My RA heard the commotion and dashed down the hallway. She inquired whether everything was fine, and I informed her that these folks needed to leave. Claudia began yelling, claiming she was my sister and had every right to be there. Campus security arrived within minutes and led them both out, while Claudia yelled the entire time about how I was ruining everything. The next day, I met with University Legal Services, who assisted me in filing paperwork for a no trespass order. The council emphasized that if Claudia's behavior worsened further, I could be eligible for a restraining order. That evening, Elisa called from home, seeming fatigued. She said Claudia had been telling everyone I'd suffered a mental breakdown in college and was fabricating tales for publicity. Several people we knew from high school had contacted Elisa, asking what was going on. Elisa had been defending me, but she admitted it was getting more difficult because Claudia was so convincing. 2 weeks later, I returned to Dr. Moreau's office, and she handed me a stack of articles about narcissistic abuse. Everything made sense when I read about gaslighting, public humiliation, and how abusers always act the victim when confronted. I wasn't crazy, nor was I being overly sensitive. I was angry, and for the first time, it felt like the appropriate answer. 2 days later, I was sitting in economics class when my phone rang with a call from my father. I left it on voicemail and listened to it after class, his voice exhausted, as he told that Claudia had been crying for weeks and that her therapist had advised family reunification was critical to healing. I understood the manipulation right away, yet it still made my chest tight. Albert approached me at the library that afternoon and proposed we resolve my social media issues once and for all. We spent 4 hours in his dorm room building new accounts with fictitious names and maximum privacy settings, barring everyone who might be connected to Claudia. Her pals, anyone from high school who could leak information. I wonder what Claudia's thinking when she performs these things. Ripping the bunny's head off while staring at her sister appears overly deliberate for a child. Each block seemed like another brick in the wall between me and my former existence. Midterms and papers kept me busy for weeks, and before I knew it, it was almost Thanksgiving. My parents had been calling regularly, promising Claudia that she would be at her boyfriend's family dinner in Chicago and that I would safely return home. Despite my instincts screaming at me, I drove the 3 hours home, assuring myself it would be all right for just 2 days. I froze as I stepped in the front door with my overnight luggage, seeing Claudia sitting at the dining room table with her familiar sneer. My mother appeared from the kitchen, stating we needed to hash this out as a family. I turned around without saying anything, got back in my car, and went directly to Aunt Susan's house, 20 minutes away. Susan opened the door in her jammies, obviously astonished to see me standing there with my suitcase, but she drew me in and made coffee while I sat at her kitchen table. Over store-bought pumpkin pie, I told her everything, beginning with the graduation celebration and progressing back through years of agony. Her expression darkened with each anecdote until she eventually set down her fork and stated that she had always wondered why I was so silent at family gatherings. The travel back to college was lengthier due to holiday traffic. And when I got to my dorm room at midnight, I saw that my door was slightly open, despite the fact that I had secured it. Nothing was stolen, yet everything was incorrect. My diary was on a different shelf, my laptop was open when I had left it closed, and my dresser drawers were not fully closed. My skin crawled as I examined each nook, looking for minor clues that someone had touched everything. Campus security took a report, but without proof of forced entry or larceny, they could only offer increased patrols. 3 days later, I returned to Dr. Tier Moreau's office to describe the incident, and she assisted me in recognizing the pattern of escalation in Claudia's behavior, explaining that losing control over me was making her frantic. We spent the hour developing a comprehensive safety plan that included emergency contact information, documentation tactics, and particular routines for various eventualities. I was heading back from that appointment when my phone alerted me to an email from an unfamiliar address. The mail included old Instagram photographs that I removed months ago, modified to appear compromising, with my face superimposed onto other bodies in provocative postures. Although the content was brief, Claudia's writing style was instantly apparent in her threat to send them to my teachers. I went straight to campus police, who took the blackmail threat seriously and called up a detective who specialized in cybercrime. She stated that blackmail was a felony and that they could track IP addresses, officially launching an inquiry that afternoon with case numbers and evidence logs. A week later, I was studying in the library when my mother called, distraught and yelling that Claudia had told her I was attempting to have her arrested for nothing. She requested that I drop the charges immediately, claiming that I was wrecking my sister's future due to minor sibling squabbles, but I hung off while she was still speaking. Albert had been watching everything unfold and discussed my issue with his folks during their weekly video conversation. His mother, who worked as a social worker, encouraged me to spend winter break with them at their home near Cleveland. When I visited at their house 2 weeks later, his mother sat with me in the living room and softly validated what I'd gone through, marking the first time an adult had taken my side without making excuses for Claudia or attempting to reconcile. When I returned to university after winter break, the nightmares began immediately away. I'd have dreams of Claudia standing at my dorm room doorway, sitting in the back of my courses, or waiting outside my job at the campus bookstore. The dreams were so genuine that I'd wake up at 3 a.m. I had to check my door lock 3 or 4 times before I could even consider going back to sleep. My roommate began to question my well-being since I would get up several times each night to ensure the door was closed and the windows were fastened. The lack of sleep made things difficult, but I couldn't stop myself from double-checking everything. 2 weeks into the semester, Elisa texted me a slew of screenshots that made my stomach drop. Claudia had been emailing all of our high school pals on Facebook with a completely made-up story about how I had stolen money from our parents and developed drug problems in college. She claimed that I had been begging family members for money to maintain my habits, which was why I had cut her off. Most people who knew me didn't believe it, Elisa remarked. However, I noticed from the screenshots that some individuals were starting to ask questions and wonder if there was any truth to it. I was sitting in the library trying to focus on my chemistry homework when my phone called with an unfamiliar number. It was the detective who had been managing my case, and he had some news that made me drop my head on the desk. They traced the blackmail emails I'd been receiving to a coffee shop 3 blocks from Claudia's apartment. The security camera showed her sitting there with her laptop at the exact times the emails were sent, and the investigator stated that they now had sufficient evidence to proceed with charges. The next day, I met with the prosecutor at the courthouse downtown, and she explained what would happen next. She stated that Claudia would be arrested, followed by an arraignment in which she would enter a plea, and they would most likely offer her a deal because this was her first violation. Then she looked at me and uttered what I had been dreading. 3 days later, I was in my economics class when my phone started vibrating nonstop. I came out into the hallway and noticed 5 missed calls from my mother. When I called back, she was shouting so loudly that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She continued telling me I was evil, that I was destroying our family, and that I couldn't be her daughter if I could do this. My father then took the phone and spoke in a cold and flat tone. A week later, I sat in the rear row of the courtroom, Albert to one side and Dr. Moreau to the other. My palms shook as I watched them carry Claudia in for arraignment. She pled not guilty, as the prosecutor had warned me would happen, and the judge freed her on bail with a no-contact order, which meant she couldn't approach me or speak with me in any way. As she went out of the courtroom with her lawyer, she turned and stared directly at me, mouthing something I could hear clearly from across the room. Aunt Susan contacted me that afternoon as I was walking back to my dorm. She'd been conducting her own research, speaking with cousins and other family members I hadn't seen in years. Claudia turned found to have been unkind to several of them, particularly the younger relatives. However, everyone was too terrified or embarrassed to say anything. Susan was compiling a pattern of behavior dating back to when we were young children, documenting everything individuals remembered. The stress of everything made it tough to concentrate on schoolwork. Despite knowing about the no-contact order, I would sit in class continually looking over my shoulder to see whether Claudia was present. My chemistry grade went from an A to a C in 3 weeks, and I couldn't focus long enough to read more than a page of any textbook. Dr. Moreau formally diagnosed me with PTSD at one of our sessions and suggested we meet twice a week to help me cope with everything. 2 weeks after the arraignment, I was doing laundry in my dorm basement when I checked my phone and noticed 3 new voicemails from my mother's number. My heart began beating because I sensed something was wrong. Mom never left voicemail messages. When I played the first one, I didn't hear Mom's voice. The prosecutor added witness intimidation charges the next morning when I handed her the voicemails. She played them for the court at an emergency hearing that afternoon, and he promptly revoked Claudia's bail. I stood on the courthouse steps, watching through the glass doors as 2 officers carried my sister away in handcuffs, her hands tied behind her back. I waited for remorse, sadness, or something to hit me, but all I felt was relief, like if I could finally breathe again after weeks. The next morning, a courier knocked on my dorm room door and delivered a hefty envelope from Brennan, Hayes & Associates, Columbus's most expensive law firm. My hands shook as I opened it and read the formal letter advising me to reconsider my position and warning me against irreversibly breaking family relationships, as well as implying that I could face legal action for defamation. Albert found me sitting on my bed 20 minutes later, still holding the letter, and promptly phoned the prosecutor's office while I sat there, motionless. The prosecution urged us not to worry because this was standard intimidation techniques, but I couldn't stop thinking about how my parents were spending thousands of dollars to protect the person who had been hurting me my whole life. A week later, Dr. Moreau set aside her entire afternoon to assist me in writing my victim impact statement, and each sentence felt like tearing glass out of my flesh. I wrote about the stuffed bunny, the Flushing necklace, the botched graduation party, and all the minor cuts in between that built up to 20 years of misery. She helped me find the words when I couldn't, sitting quietly as I cried through chapters describing how Claudia not only stole my childhood, but also attempted to destroy my future. That same week, Albert's mother called and officially welcomed me to stay with them for the summer, claiming their guest room was already set up and ready for me. Claudia went from cruel sister to criminal mastermind faster than someone failing chemistry class, which now appears to include our narrator, thanks to all of this drama. Breaking into dorms, making phony pictures, and committing coffee shop crimes. She sat with me in their kitchen and told me about her sister's decision to cut off toxic family members years ago, and how chosen family may be stronger than blood. And I accepted their offer, feeling as if I had finally found firm ground after months of tremors. Elisa had to testify in a deposition the next Tuesday, so she brought the video from my graduation party on her phone and showed it frame by frame to the prosecutor and Claudia's lawyer. The prosecutor contacted me later to say that was strong proof of a pattern of public humiliation and targeted harassment, particularly the point where Claudia seized the microphone as I tried to stop her. 2 weeks later, I was helping Albert's mother prepare dinner when we heard a hammering on the front door and my mother yelling that she knew I was inside. Albert's mother instructed me to remain in the kitchen while she answered the door, but I could hear everything as Marlene pushed past her and demanded to see me. When I walked into the living room, Marlene's face turned scarlet, yelling about Claudia going to prison and asking if that was what I wanted, my own sister in prison. When I didn't respond or move closer to her, she crossed the room in 3 steps and slapped me hard across the face, the sound reverberating throughout the home. Albert's mother quickly got out her phone and dialed 911, while Marlene continued to yell at me about family loyalty and how I was destroying everything. Within 10 minutes, the police arrived and arrested Marlene for assault, while I stood there with Albert's mother's arm around me, my cheeks still burning. I had to submit another police report at the station, and the detective informed me that family violence frequently worsens during legal proceedings, which did not make me feel any better about having to witness my own mother being handcuffed. The next day, I returned to my old home while my parents were at work to pack the few items I wanted to save. I sat in my former bedroom for the final time, gazing at every object and recalling how Claudia had smashed my jewelry box, torn my posters, stolen my diary, and read it aloud to her friends. I left the majority of it behind, taking only a few photos and my old debate medals before locking the door on that room and my life forever. A month later, the prosecutor called to inform me that Claudia had been offered a plea deal consisting of 2 years probation, required therapy, and a permanent restraining order, which I considered reasonable. But Claudia refused, insisting on going to trial because she wanted a chance to give her side of the tale. The prosecution said that narcissists frequently do this because they want to perform. They seek attention and the opportunity to play the victim in front of an audience. 3 days after our talk, a parcel addressed to me arrived at Albert's residence with no return address. Inside was my old plush bunny from when I was 5. Claudia had pulled the head off, and it was now badly put back together with black thread. The note simply stated, "Fixed it for you," and was signed Mom. However, it felt more like a threat than an apology or peace offering. Meanwhile, Aunt Susan had been discreetly documenting whatever she could find, rummaging through old boxes in my parents' attic and compiling a timeline spanning 20 years. She discovered elementary school report cards with teacher remarks regarding my withdrawn and anxious behavior with my sister. I found my old journals, which I assumed were lost. I found images of me flinching away from Claudia as a toddler. The pattern had always existed, scrawled in a dozen different handwritings by instructors, counselors, and coaches who had all sensed something was amiss but had never quite joined the dots. 2 months later, I decided to start something on campus that I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I reserved a tiny room at the student center and distributed brochures promoting a support group for persons who had experienced family abuse. The first meeting, I sat with my notebook and 3 seats arranged in a circle, watching the door and wondering if anyone would show up. A female named Ashley strolled in first, followed by a guy named Ben and another girl simply known as Kay. We sat for an hour, mostly looking at each other. However, at the end, Ashley was crying about her stepfather, and Ben was talking about his elder brother, who used to lock him in closets. By the 4th meeting, we had 12 participants and needed to move to a larger room. The prosecutor called me the following week to inform me that the trial date had been set for 6 months. I attempted to concentrate on my lectures, but when the notice that I'd have to testify arrived 2 days later, I threw up straight in my dorm room. Albert held my hair back as I heaved into the garbage can, and Dr. Moreau spent the entire following session reminding me that I was stronger than I realized and that I had already survived the worst part. Bisses. Chelsea from back home spotted me in the cereal section at a supermarket shop near college. She drew me into a strong hug before I could move away, telling me how much my mother missed me and how she looked dreadful without me. The guilt hit me like a blow in the stomach, and I abandoned my entire cart right in the aisle. I drove back to my flat, crying so hard that I couldn't see the road. 2 weeks later, things worsened. Claudia's lawyer filed a motion claiming that because I was mentally unwell, my testimony should be invalidated. They wanted all of my therapy records, every single session with Dr. Moreau, and anything private I'd ever said. Dr. Moreau sat me down and described what was going to happen, how they would try to use my PTSD diagnosis against me, and how they would twist things to make me appear insane. The judge limited what they could view, but Claudia's lawyer was still allowed to confront Dr. Moreau about my diagnosis in court. My former English instructor reached out on Facebook after learning about the case from another teacher. She recalls seeing me crying in the restroom after Claudia humiliated me in front of the entire cafeteria junior year. I remembered how I had begged her not to tell anyone since it would just make things worse. She offered to testify about what she had witnessed over the years. I began writing everything down in a private blog just to get it all out of my head. The words came out like poison being drawn from a wound. Page after page of memories I had attempted to forget. Albert read portions of it with my consent and then held me for an hour while I sobbed into his chest. A month later, my father sent me a letter through my lawyer. He was filing for divorce from my mother after she was arrested for assisting Claudia. He wrote that he had failed to protect me, but he still did not want Claudia to go to jail, that she was still his daughter, and that maybe we could all go to treatment together one day. I read it 3 times before throwing it away without responding. At our next meeting, the prosecutor showed me something that made my skin crawl. Security footage from a coffee shop near my hostel, the library, and the parking garage all show Claudia following me for weeks before the blackmail began. She'd been studying my calendar, calculating out when I'd be alone, and organizing everything like it was a sick game. The prosecution stated that the premeditation would make the allegations significantly more serious. I was sitting in my psychology course the next week when someone behind me laughed in a high, nasty tone that sounded exactly like Claudia. My chest tightened and I couldn't breathe or think, so I gathered my belongings and fled out of the room. I spent an hour in the bathroom attempting to calm my breathing, spraying cold water on my face and practicing the counting techniques Dr. Moreau taught me. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in Dr. Moreau's office, staring at this light bar she was holding while she discussed how EMDR could help with trauma memories. She shifted the light back and forth as I imagined Claudia pulling my bunny's head off, and my gaze followed suit, and I started sobbing harder than I had in years. But the memory felt different afterward, like if I was viewing it through thick glass rather than experiencing it again. Aunt Susan called Albert the next day, crying because she'd been discussing the trial with her daughter Sophia, and Sophia broke down and told her that Claudia had cut up her wedding dress with scissors the night before her wedding 6 years ago, convincing everyone Sophia did it herself during a panic attack about getting married. Sophia had been in treatment ever since, believing she had experienced a breakdown, but now she knew Claudia had done it, and she wanted to testify, and Aunt Susan kept saying how sorry she was for not believing me. My scores began to improve after I discovered out how to compartmentalize legal information in my mind during class. And my economics professor approached me after I aced the exam and offered me a research assistant position for the following semester, which felt like the first typical positive thing to happen in months. A month later, the pre-trial hearing began. Even though I didn't have to go, I read all of the transcripts online, and Claudia's lawyer was attempting to get the whole thing thrown out, claiming it was a family issue rather than a criminal matter. However, the judge stated that the evidence of premeditation and the gravity of the conduct plainly placed it in criminal territory. I was headed to my statistics class on Tuesday morning when campus security hurried past me into the humanities building. I followed and noticed Marlene standing there with a huge poster board banner that stated, "Forgive your family," while students took pictures with their phones. Security seized her arms and she began screaming that I was hurting our family and that God would punish me for turning my back on blood. They carried her to their car as she continued to yell, and I subsequently found out she was detained again for breaking the restraining order. That delivery with the old rabbit appears to have arrived at the perfect time, just after Claudia rejected the plea agreement. Makes me question if Marlene is indeed behind it, or if someone else intended to convey a warning about what's to come. 2 weeks later, the prosecutor summoned me to prep sessions, where she forced me to practice answering questions while pretending to be Claudia's lawyer in an attempt to make me appear insane or malicious. And she kept interrupting me when I became too upset, urging me to take a deep breath and respond with facts. At one of these meetings at the courthouse, I came across a woman named Ashley crying in the washroom. And when I inquired whether she was okay, she claimed her sister had tormented her for 20 years and she was finally filing charges. And we exchanged contacts and began chatting every day because she understood what it was like when everyone told you to just forgive your family. Albert found a USB disk in a box of my old belongings from home, and when we plugged it in, it brought up all of my childhood home videos. And in every single one, Claudia was doing something mean while smiling at the camera, such as pinching me hard enough to make me cry, stepping on my toys, or pulling my hair while my parents were filming birthday parties or Christmas morning, completely focused on the camera and oblivious to what was going on right in front of them. Claudia's lawyer told the Columbus Dispatch a week before the trial that I was a troubled young woman looking for attention and fabricating stories about my loving sister. And by lunchtime, it was all over social media, with high school students taking sides. My campus support group also commented on the post, sharing their own stories of abusive siblings. Albert's mother, who works in social services, began calling around and located 3 different therapists who had treated people at Claudia's previous workplaces for workplace bullying. While they could not violate confidentiality to testify, they all admitted off the record that Claudia had a clear pattern of targeting one individual at each employment until that person departed or had a breakdown. Even though the therapists could not testify directly, the prosecutor stated that this information would help prove a trend. 2 weeks later, we were seated in the courthouse for jury selection, and I watched as person after person was grilled about their views on family. One woman was promptly removed after saying that families should always forgive one other regardless of what happened. Another guy was cut for saying that siblings argue all the time and that it is normal, so he was also cut. The prosecutor wanted people to understand that family members, like anyone else, may be abusers. Dr. Moreau scheduled an extra session for me 3 days before the experiment began, and something simply snapped while we were talking. I realized I'd spent my entire life keeping my folks from realizing how horrible things were with Claudia. I never told them the worst stuff since I didn't want to raise difficulties or force them to choose sides. I was so busy trying to be the good daughter who didn't make a scene that I let Claudia slowly ruin me. The night before the trial, I was in my hotel room with Albert, reviewing my notes, when my phone called from an unknown number. I answered, and my father's voice was slurred and inebriated, stating he wished I hadn't been born since none of this would have happened to their family. Albert grabbed the phone and hung up, leaving me shivering. The next morning, Elisa arrived at my hotel after flying in from California, where she had moved for employment. We remained up late that night, reading through our old yearbooks, and she pointed out photo after image of me attempting to avoid Claudia at school gatherings. She remembered how professors would assume we were just sisters when I would arrive to class with red eyes from sobbing. The first day of trial began with opening statements, and I felt awful watching Claudia sit there in this conservative gown she had never worn before. The prosecutor presented dates and examples to demonstrate 20 years of escalating abuse, but Claudia's counsel continued to refer to it as sibling rivalry that was exaggerated. Claudia genuinely dabbed her tears with a tissue, as if she were the victim here. The next day, they showed the graduation party film, and some jurors shifted uneasily in their seats as Claudia grabbed the microphone. Her counsel objected repeatedly, claiming that it was prejudiced, but the judge allowed it to be used as evidence of pattern conduct. During lunch recess, I was returning from the restroom when I noticed Claudia in the corridor. She looked right at me and flashed this charming, phony smile before mouthing the words, "I love you, sister," with a mocking look in her eyes that made my skin crawl. I had to hurry to the restroom and puke up. On day 2 of the trial, they called me to testify, and I sat in the witness chair, attempting to keep my voice firm. I told them about the bunny when I was 5 and how she looked me in the eyes while pulling off its head. I mentioned the necklace she flushed, the clothes she damaged, and the rumors she started. My voice only cracked once when I described finding my bunny's head in my backpack at school the next day, exactly where she had put it. Several jurors appeared to be upset by the story. Then came cross-examination, and Claudia's lawyer pressed me hard. He claimed that I was jealous of my successful older sister, as well as vengeful and possibly mentally unstable. He kept attempting to twist my remarks, but I just kept responding, "That's not true," and sticking to the truth as Dr. Moreau had taught me. He asked why I waited so long to report anything, and I explained that my parents had always told me it was just sister stuff. After I finished testifying, they called my old English teacher, Mrs. Keller, who had driven up from our hometown. She produced an old teaching diary in which she had written notes about finding me crying in the hallway on several occasions, always after seeing Claudia. She had dates and details regarding her concerns written down from years ago. The prosecutor called my cousin Monica next, and she looked so little as she walked to the witness stand, her hands quivering as she grabbed a tissue. Monica began about Claudia's wedding 3 years ago, when she was a bridesmaid, and how Claudia had ruined her dress the night before by pouring red wine on it while laughing. She burst into tears as she explained how Claudia convinced everyone at the wedding that Monica had gotten drunk and damaged her own dress out of envy. The prosecutor displayed images of the destroyed garment and text exchanges in which Claudia boasted about it to her pals. Monica's voice cracked as she revealed Claudia liked harming people, and some of the jury members took notes, while others looked horrified. After Monica stood down, the cybercrime detective entered the stand with a large folder of evidence and began outlining the internet harassment campaign in detail. He showed me IP addresses tracked back to Claudia's devices as well as timestamps, demonstrating she had been sending me abusive texts at all hours for months. My images were manipulated horribly on the bogus social media accounts she made, and she put them on sites I can't even explain. The detective demonstrated how complex and organized everything was, including spreadsheets that tracked when to deliver messages for maximum psychological impact. During the lunch break, I was sitting alone in the hallway when my father stepped up, appearing as if he had aged 10 years since I last saw him. His suit was creased, and his eyes were red as he stood there staring at me before apologizing and admitting that he realizes what she is now. I didn't forgive him, but I nodded because what else could I do, given what had happened between us? When court began that afternoon, Claudia finally took the stand in her own defense, dressed in an innocent white frock as if she were a victim. She burst into tears and claimed I'd always been jealous of her and was making stuff up to get attention because I couldn't tolerate being the less successful sibling. Her lawyer asked her simple questions, and she responded with a beautiful voice I'd never heard her use before, blotting away phony tears. The jurors seemed to believe it until the prosecutor began cross-examining her and asking about the video from my graduation party. She tried to deny it at first, but when he showed the video of her uttering that horrific statement, her entire expression transformed. The prosecutor kept pushing and presenting evidence, and Claudia eventually snapped and screamed that I deserved it because I was constantly trying to make her appear bad. The entire courtroom fell silent, and I noticed jurors slump back in their seats as they finally saw the genuine Claudia beneath the act. The following day, character witnesses testified, and my teachers described how I had been a decent student who suddenly began missing courses when the harassment began. My manager at my university job remembered finding me crying in the storage area several times, and Albert mentioned the night terrors I was experiencing. Elisa gave me texts in which I begged her to help me find out what I had done wrong to make Claudia so angry. That night, back in my apartment, I couldn't sleep and kept replaying Claudia's testimony in my thoughts. Even though I knew the truth, the ease and convincingness with which she lied made me doubt myself at first, because that is what years of gaslighting do to you. I stared at the ceiling till morning, reflecting on how she had almost convinced me that I was the problem again, just like when we were kids. The 5th day of trial was dedicated to closing arguments, during which the prosecutor detailed the progression from childhood bullying to criminal harassment and stalking. He displayed a timeline of how things worsened after I severed touch, emphasizing Claudia's lack of remorse despite overwhelming proof. The defense lawyer contended that family dysfunction and sibling rivalry had gotten out of control rather than criminal action that required jail time. While the jury deliberated, I sat in the corridor with Albert holding my hand, Elisa on the other side, and Aunt Susan across from us. 20 years of facts suddenly making sense must be like discovering that your childhood house was constructed on a poisonous waste dump. Explains a lot, but doesn't make it any less dreadful. Susan glanced at me and said, "Whatever happens, you've already won by breaking free." I wasn't sure I believed her yet. We'd been waiting for 2 hours when we heard shouts from outside, and security officers rushed past us to the courthouse entrance. Marlene had returned, violating her restraining order once more, and was yelling at reporters that I had destroyed our family while attempting to push through security to get inside. The guards held her arms as she attempted to spring at me through the doorway, shouting that I was a liar who had turned everyone against them. The officers arrived within minutes and detained her for violating the restraining order, while the bailiff instructed us to return inside. We spent the remainder of the day sitting in the corridor, waiting for news, but none came. The next morning, the prosecutor found us in the same position and informed us that the jury had requested to examine the graduation video and all of the cybercrime evidence again, indicating that they were taking it seriously. I couldn't eat anything, so Albert kept bringing me water that I couldn't drink as we watched other cases being handled and resolved around us. Dr. Moreau arrived around noon and sat with us for a bit, telling me that whatever occurred, I had already won by standing up to them, that Claudia no longer defined me. Something about hearing this made me understand she was correct, since for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of my sister. The third day began the same way, with us sitting in those rough plastic chairs when the bailiff appeared and announced that the jury had returned. My hands began to shake so badly that I could barely stand up. As we returned to the courtroom and saw the jury take their places, the foreman stepped up carrying a piece of paper, and I gripped Albert's hand so tightly that I thought I'd break it. Guilty of all counts, including harassment, blackmail, and witness intimidation. Claudia's expression changed from smug to astonished to absolute wrath in roughly 3 seconds. The judge began discussing scheduling, but Claudia sprang up and lunged across the defense table at me, yelling that I had ruined her life. 2 court officials apprehended her, but she continued to fight and kick, making threats about what she would do to me if she got free. The judge pounded his gavel and added contempt of court to her charges as she was carried out, still screaming. He set sentence for 6 weeks later, and the prosecutor indicated that with multiple felonies and her current behavior, she faced 2 to 5 years in prison. Outside the courts, reporters waited, and I gave them a brief statement about how I hoped this would help other abuse survivors seek justice, even if the offender was family. Then we proceeded to Albert's house, where I just broke down and screamed for what seemed like hours while his mother made tea and his father ordered pizza, and they just let me weep. My support group hosted a modest celebration for me the following week, and one woman stated I had given them all hope that they could stand up to their own abusers. A week later, I received a letter from Aiden with a check for my whole education fund, which Marlene had attempted to withdraw before the restraining order was issued. He wrote that he had moved out, filed for divorce, and began therapy, and that he was aware that he had failed me but was working to improve. 6 weeks later, we returned to court for Claudia's sentence, and she received 3 years in prison, 2 years probation, and required psychological treatment. She had to be forcefully hauled out of the courtroom, yelling that I would pay for this and that she would make me sorry when she left. The prosecutor filed for a permanent restraining order that same day, and the judge granted it right away. Claudia could never contact or come within 500 feet of me again once she was released from prison. If she broke it, she'd be sent back to jail. I could now breathe without looking over my shoulder. During our following appointment, Dr. Moreau helped me comprehend how I really felt. She suggested I was mourning the family I should have had rather than the one I ended up with. That made perfect sense because I was not sad about losing them. I was unhappy because I never had real parents or a real sibling in the first place. 2 weeks later, Marlene issued a letter through her lawyer stating that she had entirely disowned me. She was removing me from her will and deleting me from the family as if I never existed. Albert and Elisa came over that night, and we lit the letter in my backyard fire pit. Watching those cruel comments crumble to ash was liberating. 2 months later, I went to the courthouse and formally changed my last name to Smith, Albert's mother's maiden name. His family had basically adopted me anyway, and they were overjoyed about it. The paperwork was like removing chains I'd worn my entire life. When I returned to campus for sophomore year, everything changed. My grades were excellent. I received the research position I desired and helped to expand the abuse survivors support group. We increased our membership from 5 to over 30. Trauma no longer controlled me. Aunt hosted Thanksgiving that year for me, Albert, his parents, his sister, and the cousin who testified for me. We cooked and laughed together, and no one screamed, threw objects, or delivered hateful words. Albert's father raised a toast to the chosen family and new beginnings. I shed happy tears for the first time in years. A few weeks later, I contributed an anonymous story about sibling abuse to the university newspaper. Within days, my inbox was swamped with messages from other students who shared their own experiences. Some had never informed anyone before. I organized a weekly coffee meetup for anyone who wants to discuss. During one of my therapy appointments in December, Dr. Moreau pointed out that I hadn't addressed Claudia once in the previous 3 meetings. She was correct. I hadn't even considered her. The incessant fear and anxiety had finally subsided. Aunt contacted in January to let me know Aiden had reached out to her. He had moved into a modest apartment, begun therapy, and was attending support groups for parents who allowed abuse. He wanted her to tell me he was working on himself and would understand if I never saw him again. Maybe someday we can try to reconstruct something, but not now or soon. By the spring semester, Albert and I had moved into a tiny apartment near campus. We sat on our secondhand couch one night, figuring out our junior year schedules and summer internship opportunities. My phone stayed silent the entire time. No furious texts, guilt trips, threats, or dread. I'd created a life that Claudia couldn't touch, surrounded by people who genuinely loved me. For the first time since I was a child with my teddy bunny, I felt absolutely protected.